Welcome back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we talk about 10 more of the absolute greatest vampire movies ever made. So this is part 2, so if there's any movies that you think are missing, there's a good chance they're over on part 1. So definitely go check that out. But with that, let's get to the list!
Bring the new blood.
This is the end of what? Of time?
Byzantium is a 2012 vampire horror movie. Directed by Neil Jordan, it stars Gemma Arterton, Saoirse Ronan, and Sam Riley. Residents of a small coastal town learn with deadly consequences the secret shared by two mysterious women who have sought shelter in a local resort.
There comes a time in life when secrets should be told. You've got secrets, haven't you?
So it's crazy. When I made part 1 of the vampire list, it just blew me away how many great vampire movies there were still left that I hadn't mentioned. And on top of that, there was quite a few that I had never seen before, and this was one of them. This movie is fantastic. It's gorgeously shot. I love the pacing of it and style, just this kind of elegant way of unfolding this story. There's narration at times, just the way it's told and how it jumps between two different timelines seamlessly, to be honest. Like, it doesn't feel clunky whatsoever. And a lot of movies, when they switch timelines like that, it kind of leaves you kind of feeling disoriented for a second, but this doesn't do that. It just, the way they cross over from one to the next feels really fluid and makes a lot of sense. The entire cast just do a fantastic job in it, but besides the few that I mentioned, it also has Caleb Landry. I've become a fan of his ever since I saw him star in Brandon Cronenberg's movie Antiviral. He's just this really charismatic figure that I think jumps off the screen because he has a small role in this movie, but he makes the most of that performance, makes the most of that role. In a lot of ways, I think the second half of this movie is really made by his performance. But I'm just blown away how underrated this movie is, how I had still never heard of it until watching it recently. And it's just so well done, really captures that vampire lore and legend and puts a really kind of unique spin on it. So if you've never seen this one, I highly recommend you get on it and check it out.
Bring the new blood.
Did he that boy? Hey, that was... Don't swear. What are we? Werewolves, not werewolves.
What We Do in the Shadows is a 2014 New Zealand mockumentary horror comedy, written and directed by Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi. It also stars Clement and Waititi as well as Jonathan Bruh. The story follows 3 vampires who are being filmed for a documentary and struggle with the mundane aspects of modern life.
When you get 3 vampires in a flat, obviously there's going to be a lot of tension.
This movie is so much fun. I'm not sure I'd ever seen the full movie prior to this watch. I know I had seen parts of it, but I felt like I'd never been able to really focus on it, sit down and watch it from beginning to end. But I'm very familiar with the series, and I've just always meant to go back and completely watch the original, really kind of give it its due. And it's just so good. I'm not gonna lie, I think that the series is a little bit better. Don't kill me over that, please. Although I do think this movie is absolutely brilliant, and I'm very aware that the series wouldn't exist without this movie. It's just, they've perfected it, in my opinion, with the series. It's just such a polished, amazing entity in and of itself. But everything about this movie, swearwolves, like, it is so much fun and such a brilliant, fresh take on vampires and just horror in general. I just love the New Zealand humor. There's so many horror comedies that have come out of that part of the world that are just absolutely phenomenal. There's just something about their sense of humor that gets me every time. This movie is absolutely fantastic, a for sure modern classic, and one that every fan of horror comedies has gotta check out.
Bring the new blood.
This is hardly your picture any longer.
Shadow of the Vampire.
How dare you destroy my photographer? Why not the script girl?
I'll eat her later.
Shadow of the Vampire is a 2000 historical drama horror movie. Directed by E. Elias Merhige, it stars John Malkovich, William Dafoe, and Udo Kier. It's a fictionalized account of the making of the classic vampire horror movie Nosferatu. With the cast and crew mysteriously disappearing, they begin to have suspicions about the lead actor.
Iris in, begin.
It's been a fitful night, but you wake refreshed.
What is that beside you?
It's a book about vampires.
Nosferatu.
What a fantastic movie this is. It's dark and foreboding, but it also just puts a really fun spin on the whole vampire movies and lore and myth and all of that. It's just a really fresh, unique movie that shows you the behind the scenes of making a film. And that's really fun, especially because it's back in the silent era of film. So it's really interesting to see how that was done. But then it also starts to slowly bring on this whole different element of horror movie where you know this guy's a vampire from pretty much the very beginning of the movie, but yet you don't know how it's going to play out. And William Dafoe does a phenomenal job of playing this vampire, Count Orloff, in this. Because he's a vampire, but he's kind of trying to pretend to be an actor that's also pretending to be a vampire. It's this really kind of fun, weird way that they have him portraying this character. But he's scary and creepy, but yet also kind of humorous at times. Just a really, really fantastic performance, and one that I don't think gets nearly enough love. It's a crime to me that he's so overlooked at times, because I don't know if there's anybody that can outact this guy. Just everything he's in, he just is such a wonderful performer and transforms into whatever role he's asked to play. This really is a phenomenal movie, and in my opinion, absolutely deserves to be talked about as one of the greatest vampire horror movies.
Bring the new blood.
Faster, my love. Faster.
Daughters of Darkness is a 1971 erotic vampire horror movie. Directed by Harry Kumel, it stars Delphine Seyrig, Daniel Ouimet, and John Carlin. While passing through a vacation resort, a newlywed couple encounters a mysterious, strikingly beautiful countess and her assistant.
Silly tales about owls chased away by garlic and vampires shrinking from crosses.
What a sexually charged, gorgeous movie this is. Just everything about it just oozes sex, but it's in a beautiful kind of elegant way, so it's not like you're watching a porn or something like that, but it's this 1970s movie that really just has so much class and style and art appeal. It really is a simple story, so it's not really the story so much that makes this movie so brilliant. It's just the style of it. It really just has this way of presenting itself. Everything from when you see a dead body and the way they look, to the way the cast carry themselves, the way they talk. It's all done competently with style. I just love the look of this movie. I just could not get over how much I love it. I had seen it way back and didn't really remember much of anything. And so this was really kind of a fresh watch in a way for me. Other than that, I kind of knew the story. I remembered the story, but just the way it looked and all of that, I completely forgot just how much I love this movie. As a visual medium artist myself, I just cannot get over how much I enjoy the art appeal that is put into this. Just everything about the pacing of it, the way it's shot, and it's framed up, the camera angles, just the way it's edited. I mean, it kind of has these little bit of like a pause between scenes. It's done in a way that it just breathes, and so it's like between each scene there's just almost like this tiny little pause before the scene ends that just gives it just this almost like causing you to stumble on yourself, to want more, to be wanting the next scene to begin. And it's so entertaining because of that. And talk about a gorgeous cast. Everyone in this movie is just beautiful. They're just beautiful people that just really have this major sex appeal. And it's wild to think that this is from the 70s and yet it still just leaps off the screen from these people. I think it's a real gem, and it's sad that you just don't hear more people talk about it. But it's so well done and unique that absolutely deserves to get your attention. So most definitely give this a look.
The Hunger.
The Hunger is a 1983 erotic vampire horror movie. Directed by Tony Scott, it stars Catherine Deneuve, David Bowie, and Susan Sarandon. A love triangle develops between a beautiful yet dangerous vampire, her cellist companion, and a scientist.
And life signs terminate right here.
This is another absolutely sexually charged movie. Like I said with the last one, it just oozes sex. There's just so much appeal and style. It's amazing. The other one was that 70s kind of vibe, and this is the 80s, but both of them feel very much just beautiful and artistic and creative and very sensual as well. The cast in this are all gorgeous, but also really full of character and charm. Each one of them just makes for a very interesting watch. And this one also has a pretty interesting story because, yeah, it's pretty simple. It's a love, triangle kind of deal. But the way it plays out, it's mysterious and has you on the edge of your seat. Just in general, though, this is a very sleek, well put together movie. I love the overall style and creative flair of it. And it is talked about more than Daughters of Darkness, but I still think it's a pretty underrated movie because this takes the whole sexuality of vampires, and just like Daughters of Darkness, it really puts it up front and center and really kind of delves into that and kind of sees where that little rabbit hole goes of what it would be like to have these very sexually charged, beautiful, erotic vampire kind of situations, but without feeling like a Red Shoes Diary type of deal. Not a soft porn kind of thing here. It still has class and charm to it. This is another great one that absolutely deserves to be talked about in the vampire genre.
Bring the new blood.
You can't kill me.
John Carpenter's Vampires.
Vampires is a 1998 neo-western action horror movie. Directed and scored by John Carpenter, it stars James Woods, Cheryl Lee, and Thomas Ian Griffith. Recovering from an ambush that killed his entire team, a vengeful vampire slayer must retrieve an ancient relic that would allow vampires to walk in the daylight.
Forget whatever you've seen in the movies. It's not like they're seducing everybody in sight with cheesy Euro trash accents, all right? They don't turn into bats. Crosses don't work. You want to kill one, you drive a wooden stake right through his heart.
I know I'll probably get some shit for this pick because for whatever reason, this movie gets a lot of hate every time I've talked about it on this channel. But I think it's great, man. It's a lot of fun and absolutely badass. It very much feels like a Western. It has that shoot 'em up, Old West kind of vibe, but yet you're also dealing with a modern day world and vampires. I love the invention, the weapons, the different things that they come up with. There's just a lot of creativity involved in the way they kill these vampires. And just the whole movie in general, it has this real slick, interesting, yet dirty Old West vibe to it. And the way it's shot and looks just feels very Carpenter-esque. Everything from the pacing of it and the music. I mean, he did do the soundtrack, but it just feels very much like a Carpenter movie. That's why it does surprise me how much I hear people say negative things about it. Yes, it's a little campy. Yes, there's a little bit of cheese to it, but that just makes it fun. It's kind of like Escape from New York. Yeah, there's some cheesy, kind of hokey things here and there, but overall, you're in for a great, action-packed, fun time. This film is a fun ride that I think is definitely worth taking.
Bring the new blood.
Welcome to slavery.
No thanks. I already had a wife.
From dusk
till dawn.
From Dusk Till Dawn is a 1995 action horror movie directed by Robert Rodriguez and written by Quentin Tarantino. It stars Harvey Keitel, George Clooney, Quentin Tarantino, and Juliette Lewis. The plot follows a pair of American criminal brothers who take a family hostage in order to cross into Mexico, but ultimately find themselves trapped in a saloon overran by vampires.
We might be in trouble. There are a bunch of fucking vampires out there trying to get in here and suck our fucking blood.
So I hope you've seen this movie, because just the fact that you're watching this video and seeing me talk about it as a vampire movie kind of spoils a little bit of this movie's magic. Because I went into it not knowing the twist, not knowing that this is literally like two movies that split in the middle and are just kind of seamed together. Because I remember going in and just being absolutely mind blown, had no idea of what I was getting in for. No idea that it was going to turn into this full blown, just absolute chaos vampire movie. Because the first half is very much like a shoot 'em up, bank heist action kind of movie. And then the second half, on a dime, just completely switches into this survival mode, fighting off the most crazy, over-the-top vampires that you can imagine. But this movie is so much fun. It's shot, and the style of it feels very much of like that exploitation 1970s movie style that Quentin Tarantino obviously loves and has done a lot in his movies. There's always a bit of that, kind of infused into whatever project he's working on. But the gore and the violence and the special effects are just outstanding, so entertaining. And not only did Savini do fantastic special effects work in this, he's also acting in it, and it's really fun to watch him in this role. Everything from his little penis derringer that pops out, this movie has so much character, so many iconic scenes, and to this day, I would argue that Selma Hayek with the snake is still the hottest woman I have ever seen in a movie. Just absolutely gorgeous, and definitely made young Kanan uncomfortable in the theater seat. It's just such a fun movie. There is no way I could talk about vampire horror movies without putting it on one of my list.
Bring the new blood.
Pray for daylight. The night has its price.
Near Dark is a 1987 neo-western horror movie. Directed by Catherine Bigelow, it stars Adrian Pasdar, Bill Paxton, and Lance Hendrickson. The plot follows a young man in a small Oklahoma town who becomes involved with a family of nomadic vampires.
I'm gonna separate your head from your shoulders.
Do it fast.
All right.
The time's roll.
What a fantastic movie this is. It's one of those movies that really just sticks out from the 1980s as being just so well put together. It's really crazy though to me, because this was probably the #1 most requested movie for part 2, and yet you barely ever hear about this movie. It definitely wasn't one that was talked about in the 80s. It wasn't until more recently that it started to grow a cult following. And as much as I felt like I've seen it back in the day, I didn't remember much of it, so I had to rewatch it. And I'm really glad I did, because I don't remember it really standing out as being anything super special. I do remember I had fun with it, but it wasn't like one that I was like, oh yeah, this is one of the greatest ever made or whatever. Whereas I totally disagree with that now. I think it's absolutely one of the best vampire horror movies, bar none. Just the way it captures vampires, the style of it. It really is kind of a movie before its time, because I feel like this is a movie that now, with that kind of artisan feel to movies, that art house, A24 style that people are doing more and more, I think you'd see a movie like this just get more love in that environment. Because even though it's a pretty simple story, these characters are complex. They don't feel simple. And the setup and the scenes and things like that, everything feels complex. Just the relationships and the way the story unfolds and how things go down. Yet if you were to tell people the story, it's pretty simple. You could pretty much sum it up in a couple sentences. But it doesn't feel that way when you're watching it. It feels so much more than that. And a big part of that is Bill Paxton. He just absolutely is a scene stiller in this. Just you can't take your eyes off of him when he's on the screen. Just everything he does, he's got this quirkiness about him, but there's this unhinged kind of evil part to him, but yet you also kind of like him. Very, very fun character. And the way this movie wraps up and ends, I feel like has so much style to that. Just everything about how this movie's put together feels very stylish, very creative, and honestly, very memorable. So if you're like me and it's been a while since you've seen it, or if for whatever reason, maybe you're younger, you haven't seen it, I think you'd be surprised on how much you love this one. So definitely give it a look.
Bring the new blood.
Vill du bli ihop med mig?
Let the Right One In is a 2008 Swedish romantic horror movie. Directed by Thomas Alfredson, it stars Lena Lederson, Care Hedenbrandt, and Patrick Ridmark. The story's about an overlooked and bullied boy who finds love and revenge through Ellie, a beautiful yet peculiar girl. So even though this version, which came first, is on this list, and I do think is a superior movie, I did want to mention the 2010 American remake, Let Me In, because as far as remakes go, it doesn't get much better than that. However, we're talking about one of the greatest vampire movies, period here. The original, this one is just phenomenal. Everything from the way it looks, the style, everything feels cold and grim yet beautiful and charming. It's this really weird fine line that this movie walks because it's so full of mood and atmosphere, like almost nothing I've ever seen besides this. This is one of those few movies that I would argue is perfect. I wouldn't change anything about it, I don't think, because the way it looks, the pacing of it, the cast, everyone, I mean, these kid performers are incredible. It feels so real and really kind of pulls you in. It is so believable, this environment that is created here. It feels lived in, like a universe that actually really exists out there somewhere. This really is a modern masterpiece, and without a doubt, one of the best vampire horror movies, period. Nosferatu is a 1922 silent German expressionist horror movie. Directed by F.W. Murnau, it stars Max Schreck, Gustav von Wangenheim, and Greta Schroeder. The story's about a vampire, Count Orlok, who preys on the wife of his estate agent and plagues their small town. So the story of this movie and how it got made is very interesting because it is the first vampire movie. And I got a lot of grief once again about leaving this off the last list, but as much as I do consider this to be just an absolutely amazing work of art, achievement, because it is the first and all of that, it's kind of a boring watch, guys. I have watched this movie and it is good, it is interesting, right? But it is a little bit boring. So even though it is super important, it's not necessarily one of my favorite watches, but it is one of my favorites when it comes to the way it looks, the style of it, the pacing of it. It's just incredible, especially considering that nothing like it had been done before. And it's really interesting because they wanted to use the story of Dracula, but they weren't given permission. They weren't given the rights. People didn't see film like we do today, and so they weren't allowed to use it. So they had to kind of come up with their own thing. I don't know if this would stand up today per se, because I mean, it is Dracula. Like, it's literally the same story. They just named the characters a little bit different. I mean, other than that, there's not much between the two that is different. But I gotta say, Count Orlok is so incredibly creepy. And even though I consider the 1931 Dracula to be the better as far as the two original, so to speak, vampire movies, I think Count Orlok is definitely scarier, definitely creepier, and I mean, he is creepy to this day. Whereas when you see Bela Lugosi, as much as you may enjoy and appreciate his performance and all of that, right? I don't think anybody is going to say that he is scarier, he is creepier than Count Orlok. I mean, that is an absolutely horrifying look and style. So more of what this movie has accomplished and impacted and what it began is what puts it on this list. But as far as watchability, I mean, it's interesting. It's good. It tells an interesting story, but it is pretty boring. It is pretty slow, and it is a little bit hard, at least for me, to watch with those, you know, subtitles. Like, I prefer to hear voices, okay? Silent movies are just not necessarily my jam. But it is the OG, an absolutely iconic classic, a pioneer, and without a doubt, one of the greatest vampire horror movies ever made. Alright guys, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching this. If you enjoyed this, please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ding that little button, because that is the best way to keep track of this channel and when I post videos like this, and I post videos like this every single week. I also want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys absolutely mean so much to me. And if you would like to find out how you can become a part of the Ghost Pirate crew on Patreon, there's a link down in the description. Or over here, become a channel member, there's a little button right down there that says join. But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button, and remember guys, horror can be fun! And if you enjoyed this, click right here to see the 10 best alien horror movies. And I'll see you guys next time!